Hi, the objective of this talk track is to give you some ideas as far as what to say when you make a first telephone call with the customer using Think Like a CEO app. And in this example, we're going to be assuming that we're calling into someone at John Deere and Company. So we pull up John Deere on our Think Like a CEO app, and probably the first thing we would do, or I would recommend you do for an initial call, is to hit on the profit strategies and read through these and see what they say about where the customer is going and what types of things they're focused on. Then what you want to do is look through some of these questions and see which ones you think might be appropriate to ask the customer as you're chatting with them on the phone. Now, it's very important at this point that you're not a sales Rain Man, as I say, for instance. So you don't want to say, for instance, Mr. Customer, I saw that your gross margin year over increased from 31.5% to 33%. I mean, that might become important during the conversation or maybe during a sales call, but the important part here is it's not something that we want to lead with in our initial call. What we want to do is do a couple things, our objectives. Number one, differentiate ourselves against our competition. And number two, provide value immediately to the customer so they see that they're talking to someone that's done their homework and that it's worth his time to spend a few minutes with us on the phone. So some of the ideas for opening lines that I've used over the years, and again, you can come up with your own. You can maybe have a workshop with some of your peers and come up with some of these, write them on the whiteboard. But some of the ones that I've always liked to use are right away. I did some research on your company before this call. I pulled your 10K statements. That's a very important way that I like to say it. I don't say I looked at your annual report. I don't say I went to your website. I say I pulled your 10Ks. Okay? So I did some research on your company and, in fact, your industry before this telephone call, Mr. Customer. I pulled your 10K reports. Then I can say something like, when I compare you to 4 or 5 of your competitors, what I see is, and maybe I actually, at that point, ask some of these questions in the profit strategies, or perhaps even, for instance, if I were to say, I looked at 3 or 4 of your competitors and your company, and what I saw was, and you can just say what you see on this graph. For instance, with revenue, it looks like everyone in the industry is struggling. It looks like you're struggling about average, and one of your competitors is actually doing better, although even they're at 0. So I just described the graph. I told him that, or her, that I did some information on their company, and they're likely to open up now, okay? Some other things that you might say are, when I did my research on your company, the competitors I looked at were Caterpillar, CNH Global, and Navistar International. Do you think this is accurate, Mr. Customer? Do you benchmark against any other competitors? If they go, yes, in fact, I do, or we do, one competitor we look at, even though it's not our industry at all, but we want to make sure that we work with, that we are similar to them with results, is called Apple. So we do look at Apple. Okay, now just like that, I can add Apple, and I have Apple in the analysis that we can talk about. So we can also, as we discuss the company with the executive, for instance here, say, I understand that it's very competitive in the marketplace, as we said earlier. Now we have some of these questions that come right up that we can ask. Okay, what are you doing differently now strategy-wise than you were before the extreme focus on sales became your strategy? All right. How does the degree of product differentiation achieved through innovation and new product features affect your sales revenues? You can start asking some questions that came up in the profit strategies that may be a little bit more insightful. You've already set the stage, that you've done your homework, that you've looked at the company and their competition, and if you know that there's a certain aspect that they would be interested in as you're calling in, for instance, if you're in the supply chain world and you're going to be calling in the supply chain, maybe you can start with the idea that you've done some work on their competitors, and you notice, for instance, that their inventory is at 71 days. What does management think of that? What type of programs do you have to address that? So you can start getting information to the customer, letting him know that you did some research on the organization, and then as you're talking to him, when he agrees with something that you say, when he says, yes, 71 days for inventory is too long for us, we're focused on shrinking that significantly. Now you have that value item. And when you have that value item from the first call, that's what you want to focus on like a laser beam going forward. So that's a little bit of the talk track of how you can use Think Like a CEO. Everyone can use it differently. What I do recommend, though, is immediately letting them know that you pulled their 10Ks, you did some research, you maybe don't understand everything that's going on, but certain things came to your attention that you want to address. Is this what you're seeing in your organization? Is this what you're hearing from your senior executive level? That's the way that I've done it, and I think that's the way that you can differentiate yourself and really drive results from the very first telephone call and Think Like a CEO. Thank you, team. Good selling, and rock on.